if Biden wins, we may as well get in line for unemployment right now because it's going to be a very long line. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit the subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about Joe Biden. He says he's going to shut down the U.S. economy again if he becomes president, and that's what scientists are recommending. Never mind the fact that the National Institutes for Health, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he's not recommending a shutdown. President Trump has already gone through the process of reopening the country and issuing guidelines to states that they can reopen in phases, such that labor markets bottomed at about April, where 25 million people had lost their jobs. About 10 million jobs have been recovered since then. And so as the states are gradually safely reopening, we had a little bit of a surge in cases in the early summer that's now been mitigated, and cases have stabilized once again. And so going forward, we're looking for ways to safely reopen, whether it be schools, but also other types of businesses, and what sorts of mitigation steps can be taken both by individuals and establishments in order to prevent the virus from really ticking up, absent a vaccine, because right now there is no vaccine. And in fact, there's never been a coronavirus vaccine that's been effective, not for SARS, not for MERS, not for anything else, not for the common cold. And so Joe Biden, though, he doesn't really seem to be paying attention, I think, to the implications of what we've already been through and what we know about the virus now. He's still kind of operating on a March 2020 mentality where we didn't know enough about the virus to really get a handle on it. Now we really do have a handle on it. We know what's working in terms of mitigation, despite everything kind of reopening right now. So I think that we don't need another shutdown, but Joe Biden, it seems like he's anxious to implement another shutdown. So let's take a look at this. He says, quote, "I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists." Let's take a listen to what Joe Biden is saying to ABC News' David Muir.
Sworn in come January, and we have coronavirus and the flu combining, which many scientists have said is a real possibility. Would you be prepared to shut this country down again?
I would be prepared to do whatever it takes to save lives, because we cannot get the country moving until we control the virus. That is the fundamental flaw of this administration's thinking to begin with. In order to keep the country running and moving and the economy growing and people employed, you have to fix the virus. You have to deal with the virus.
So if the scientists say, shut it down?
I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists.
So again, that's Joe Biden. He says he would shut it down. And I think that that's a big mistake. And it could lead to way many more job losses than we've already experienced that we're just beginning to recover from now the past 3 months. And I think his plan is really to hold the country hostage until there's a vaccine or something. But basically, there's never been an effective vaccine for coronavirus, not for SARS, not for MERS, as I mentioned, and not for the common cold. And there's a bunch of candidates that are basically in clinical trials right now, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be effective. When this was looked at with SARS, Dr. Rachel Roper, a professor of immunology of East Carolina University who worked on a SARS vaccine years ago, she told New York Magazine in April, quote, "They are really very similar viruses, SARS and COVID-19, both virulent and contagious. People think, oh, if you make antibodies to it, it's going to be protective." That's not necessarily true. We were able to induce an immune response, but it wasn't good enough to really protect against the disease. And I think this is very relevant. A study out of the UK found that only 17% of COVID-19 patients retained the antibodies after a 3-month period. And so that's not good enough. And if that's what the vaccine is going to produce, then you might have to come in for multiple shots if they'll be even effective at dealing with this. What they're reporting from the New England Journal of Medicine right now, they published on July 14th, finding that the mRNA 1273 vaccine, this is Moderna's, was immunogenic, inducing robust binding antibody responses, but it recommends a 2-dose vaccination schedule. And so it's questionable, is that immune response, is the antibody response going to be enough to mitigate and stop the virus? When they had a similar vaccine for SARS, it didn't work. It was not effective. So we're still looking for this kind of holy grail of a safe and effective coronavirus vaccine, and we haven't had one yet. And that's sad. But it's a reality I think we really need to be faced with, because in Joe Biden's world, well, if it doesn't work and the cases start going up again and some scientists say that we need to shut down, he's willing to go ahead and shut down. But we've already seen what more lockdowns will do. When we lost 25 million jobs in the household survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You went from 158.7 million people with jobs in February down to 133.4 million in April. Since then, we've regained about 10.1 million jobs as states have been reopening, and coronavirus cases have come way down from their late March peak of about 250,000. They got as low as about 68,000, 64,000 in early June. And then we had a bit of a spike up again where it went back up to about 150,000 cases per day right now. Although the reported cases are actually way below that. If you go with confirmed cases, we're down to as many as anywhere from like 50,000 down to 33,000. And so you get these peaks and valleys. That's coming as cases are reported during the week, but not so much so on the weekend. So I'd say with the confirmed cases, we're clearly seeing a downward trajectory. The estimated cases, I think, show much the same thing, that in the past several weeks there was a spike and then it came back down. And then into September and October, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, they say that the cases are going to be somewhat stable at their current level until about early to mid-October, and then it's going to start spiking up as the cold and flu season ramps up. And so if Joe Biden wins in January, and that's what the question was, he's saying that he's going to shut everything down again, probably. And I think that's unfortunate. President Trump, he's very much against this. Quote, Joe Biden has said he would lock down the country again. That's crazy. We're having record job growth and a booming stock market, and Joe would end it all and close it all down. Ridiculous. And in the second quarter, we had a 32.9% contraction of the gross domestic product. Again, 25 million jobs were lost. But under the reopening, 10 million jobs have been regained in just 3 short months. In the Obama economy, it took 5 years to regain the jobs that were lost in the financial crisis and the Great Recession. Labor markets bottomed in December of 2009, and they would not recover for almost 5 years after that in 2014. When you finally got those 8 million jobs back. It took 5 years to create 8 million jobs in the Obama-Biden economy to recover them, but it took 3 months in the Trump economy to recover 10 million jobs. So I think that perhaps the U.S. economy was so strong and so resilient that we really can come bouncing back from this, but not if we're going to do another lockdown, which may not even be necessary. Now, the president's plan for reopening includes a proposed $105 billion for schools, $70 billion of which is for K through 12, basically to provide financial incentives to say to schools, if you want money to reopen, you want protective equipment, you actually have to reopen. And Joe Biden, on the other hand, he wants to send $92 billion to states, and it's optional whether they're going to reopen or not. There's a way to safely reopen. This is in the guidelines that the administration has already issued. And this was, a collaboration of the White House Coronavirus Task Force and, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes for Health. Everyone's on the same page at the Trump administration for coming up with basically phases for reopening on a safe basis as cases were declining, and then you can reopen various facets of the economy. And I think that that's important. Then they came up with guidelines for individuals, for employers, and it's 3 phases that are being recommended. And I think that this is what we should be doing. We should be looking for a way to safely reopen, even if we don't have a vaccine, because the truth is we may never have a vaccine. And that's something that we should really keep in mind. The Biden plan is to just leave it up to states. Yeah, you get the federal funds, but if you want to reopen, that's up to you. I don't think they should get the money. I think the president's right, unless they're going to reopen, because otherwise, what is all the protective equipment going to be used for? It's just going to be sitting at the schools, but they're not actually going to reopen. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and he's a part of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And what he was telling the Politico magazine earlier this month was that you don't need a shutdown right now if you're going to do other steps of mitigation. Let's listen to what he had to say.
that would not require shutting down again. There seems to be a misperception that either you shut down completely and damage a lot of things, mental health, the economy, all kinds of things, or let it rip and do whatever you want. There's a stepwise fashion that you can open up the economy successfully. You don't have to lock down again. But everybody has got to be on board for doing these 5 or 6 fundamental public health measures.
Here, Dr. Fauci, he mentions 5 or 6 public health steps that we as individuals could be taking right now. He described these in the interview as well. Let's take a listen to that.
Just talking about the public health measures. If you do them, we know from history, you can turn around the outbreak, and you could do that successfully. Universal wearing of masks, physical distancing, 6 feet or more. Avoid crowds. Outdoor better than indoor. Stay away from bars if you possibly can, and in some places even have authorities close it. That's a hotbed of transmission. And maintain hand hygiene. As simple as those things are, we know that if you implement them, they will prevent the surging and bring down the surging that's already occurred.
So there you go. Those 5 or 6 steps that Dr. Fauci recommends. Oh, by the way, President Trump, he supports wearing masks as well. President Trump says patriots wear masks. And Joe Biden, he wants to go a step further. He'd like to do a national face mask mandate, but it's probably unconstitutional, and it's certainly unnecessary when you consider the fact that 49 states already have some sort of mask requirements. Some states, many states, have statewide masks required, at least in businesses, and then there's a lot of local guidances in many other states. Point is, in 49 states, there already are mandates at the state and local level, and chances are you're already wearing a mask, particularly indoors when you go out shopping or something like that. 86% of all Americans are reporting that they are in fact wearing masks when they go shopping indoors. Outdoor settings, 47% report wearing masks. When you break that out politically, in the indoor setting, 97% of Democrats say they wear masks, 85% of independents, and 70% of Republicans. So at 86%, you're pretty much near universal wearing of masks, particularly when people are encountering others and they're not able to engage in social distancing. That's how Gallup is asking the question. How often do you wear a mask when outside the home in an indoor setting and you cannot socially distance? And so people are reporting pretty much that, yeah, they're wearing masks. And so you don't need a national mandate to do that. And most states already have some sort of requirements, particularly for businesses, schools, and other settings where they're already wearing masks. And chances are you already are wearing masks. So with all that in mind, we're pretty much meeting with the criteria that Dr. Fauci laid out, that, if we're wearing masks and we're avoiding crowds and we're engaging in social distancing, then we're not going to need or even have to consider another shutdown right now. It's an economic shutdown where you could lose millions of more jobs, and that's unnecessary. We don't need to overreact. We have a better handle on the virus right now. And so if the American people take proper precautions, there's no need for another shutdown. Biden says he would listen to the scientists, but he failed to note that the experts are already not recommending a shutdown presently. It was a hypothetical question. Now, in contrast, President Trump and the White House Coronavirus Task Force have put forth a strategy for safely reopening in phases and to respond to hotspots. We've seen this already where cases were going up a bit in June. And what happened was in Texas and Florida and other Sunbelt areas, when the cases started going up, Texas and Florida, they imposed new restrictions and ordered bars to be closed. They limited capacity at restaurants in order to slow down the virus. And those measures worked. They were effective. And so the president's strategy, it basically includes, the ability to be responsive when there's a surge or a spike in cases locally and regionally, that you can respond to that and then wait for the virus cases to go back down, and then you can kind of have a bit more open. Joe Biden's just saying he would shut it down. And he would, even if that's not what the scientists are necessarily recommending right now. And so I don't know why Biden doesn't just say, hey, we don't need to shut down. And then we could be a bit more on the same page here. But they're clearly making a distinction, and there's a contrast between what Trump is proposing and he's already working with in conjunction with states' governors, and what Biden's proposing, which kind of sounds like March 2020 mindset to me, where when we didn't know a lot about the virus and people were really nervous about it, and we didn't know how quickly the onset was, how fatal it was, how contagious it was, and how to mitigate against it. Then they were more so, states were looking at lockdowns and other measures in order to mitigate the virus. And I'll leave you with the close here. What Trump is offering reflects our federalist system, where states take the lead, is a responsive and flexible strategy that acknowledges that in certain cases, you may need to temporarily have more restrictions when the virus flares up regionally. Biden is offering a one-size-fits-all strategy, stating we cannot get the country moving until we control the virus, quote, and quote, including the economy growing and people employed. And so he would, quote, shut it down. If Biden wins, we may as well get in line for unemployment right now, because it's going to be a very long line. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.